All right, so you want to know what's behind OCBC's performance this year? Well, we're going deep into their 2023 annual report to find out.
Sounds good.
They've got a long history, 91 years,
Yeah.
really rooted in ASEAN and Greater China. And one thing that really stands out is their one-group approach.
Right.
It's like a one-stop shop, right?
Wow.
Banking, wealth management, insurance, all under that OCBC umbrella.
It's more than just a branding thing, though.
Okay.
It's how they actually function. Like, they're trying to help customers, particularly those looking at growth opportunities in ASEAN and Greater China.
So make it easy for them to do business across those regions.
Exactly. A seamless experience across all their different services.
Interesting. So they're simplifying things for customers who have these, diverse needs.
Yeah, and their annual report, it actually breaks down these needs into three main segments.
Okay.
Banking, wealth management, and insurance.
Makes sense.
And they've got these powerhouses, right? Bank of Singapore, Great Eastern, and Lion Global Investors, all working together to really bolster their wealth management offerings.
That's quite a lineup.
It is.
Now, I'm curious about the trends that are shaping each of these segments.
Yeah.
And how OCBC is adapting to them. What are you seeing?
Well, one trend that's really interesting is the rise of family offices.
Okay.
And Bank of Singapore seems to be attracting them, which suggests they're becoming experts in serving that particular niche market.
Makes sense.
Then, of course, there's the whole digital wave.
Mm-hmm.
OCBC Digital's emerging as this comprehensive platform, and engagement is high.
Really?
Yeah, they reported a 30% year-on-year increase in the use of their Financial OneView dashboard.
What is that exactly?
Think of it like a hub where you can see all your finances, even from other institutions.
Oh, okay. So they're kind of meeting customers where they are, digitally speaking.
Precisely. And it's not just convenience. They're seeing a surge in other activities like gold sales through the app, which were up 45%.
Wow.
And then you've got the expansion of their cross-border QR payments, tapping into that resurgence in travel. They're definitely anticipating and responding to those evolving customer lifestyles.
So it sounds like a very dynamic business. But let's talk about the hard numbers, the financials.
Right.
What's the story behind OCBC's overall financial performance in 2023?
Well, the story is basically one of record-breaking profit.
Oh, wow.
They reported a net profit of $7.021 billion, a 27% jump from the previous year.
That is significant. What were the primary drivers of that kind of performance?
Well, a few things stand out. First, their net interest income, essentially the money they make from lending, surged to $9.65 billion, up 25%.
Yep.
This was fueled by an expanding net interest margin. It went up by 37 basis points, reaching 2.28%.
Now, remind me what net interest margin is again?
Sure, it's basically the difference between the interest they charge on loans and what they pay on deposits.
Okay.
So you can think of it as them skillfully managing that spread.
So they're making more from their core lending business.
Right, but it's not just about loans. Non-interest income, things like fees and investment gains, that saw a healthy 7% increase, mainly due to improved trading income and investment gains.
So they're diversified.
Exactly. And they're managing their balance sheet very well, growing their loan portfolio, but being strategic about their funding sources.
Sounds like they're firing in all cylinders.
Yeah, it does.
Now, let's dig a little deeper into the financials.
Okay.
Starting with those key financial statements.
Yeah.
What about their income statement, for example?
Well, the income statement, think of it like a company's report card.
Okay.
And for OCBC, the highlight there is the consistent growth in net interest income over the past few years. Really underscores the strength of their core banking operations.
Okay. What insights can we get from their balance sheet then?
So the balance sheet is like a snapshot of their financial health at a specific moment.
Right.
We see a steady growth in total assets, driven by loan growth and strategic investments. And, importantly, their loan portfolio is expanding while maintaining good quality.
So they're not just lending more, they're lending responsibly.
Yeah. Their non-performing loan ratio is actually just 1%.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is.
Okay, so we've got the income statement, the balance sheet. What about their cash flow statement? What story does that tell us?
Well, this statement tracks the flow of money in and out of the business, and it reveals strong cash flow generation from their operations. They're funding their own growth.
And finally, free cash flow.
Right, free cash flow. That's the money they have left over after covering essential expenses.
So what does that tell us about OCBC?
Well, their solid free cash flow highlights their financial flexibility. They can use it for things like dividends, debt reduction, or reinvestment in the business.
So it seems like OCBC is in really good financial shape.
They are.
Their strategic management of income, assets, liabilities, cash flow. It paints a picture of a healthy and growing business.
Absolutely.
Now let's take a moment to think about all this from an investor's perspective. Imagine you're considering investing in OCBC. What aspects of their financial performance would you find most compelling, and why? Take a moment to reflect on that, and we'll continue our analysis shortly.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into OCBC's 2023 performance. We've been talking about their impressive financials, and there's definitely a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, for sure. We touched on that record net profit, but it's worth looking closer at how their income breaks down, to really understand how they got there.
So their total income for 2023 was a pretty substantial $13.5 billion, up 20% from the previous year. And this growth was driven by both net interest income and non-interest income. Can you talk about what contributed to this growth in each of those areas?
Absolutely. So starting with net interest income, it hit a record high of $9.65 billion, a 25% jump from the year before. This was largely driven by a combination of asset growth and, importantly, a big expansion in their net interest margin.
You mentioned net interest margin earlier, but can you just remind us what that is and why this expansion is so important?
Yeah, sure. It's a key measure of a bank's profitability. It's basically the difference between the interest a bank earns on its loans and the interest it pays out on deposits.
Huh?
So OCBC's net interest margin, it widened by 37 basis points to reach 2.28% in 2023.
Wow.
It shows they're managing that spread between their lending and borrowing rates really effectively, which is especially important in a volatile interest rate environment.
It really does show their ability to navigate those fluctuations.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears to non-interest income. What factors contributed to its growth?
Right, so non-interest income comes from things like fees, trading activities, and investment gains. OCBC saw a 7% rise in this area, primarily fueled by stronger trading income and gains from their investments.
So they're not just relying on loans, they're really taking advantage of these other ways to generate income.
Exactly. And that balanced approach probably contributes to their overall financial resilience.
It makes sense. Speaking of financial health, let's get back to those financial statements we were talking about earlier. Can we start with a closer look at their income statement? What are some of the key insights we can get from analyzing that?
So the income statement, it gives us a detailed breakdown of OCBC's revenues and expenses over a specific period. Basically, it shows us their core operating profitability. And one thing that really stands out is that consistent upward trend in net interest income over the past few years, which, highlights their strength and steady performance in those core banking operations.
Then how about the balance sheet? What kind of insights can we get from that?
Think of the balance sheet as a snapshot.
Yeah.
It captures OCBC's financial position at a specific point in time. It outlines their assets, their liabilities, and their shareholder equity. So we can see a steady growth in their total assets, driven by a combination of loan portfolio expansion and strategic investments. And what's important is that they've managed to expand their loan portfolio while maintaining good asset quality, as indicated by their low non-performing loan ratio of just 1%.
That's a really reassuring figure for investors.
Right.
It suggests they're not just growing for the sake of growth.
Right.
They're doing it in a responsible way. Now, what about their cash flow statement? What does that tell us?
So the cash flow statement, it gives us a detailed look at the money flowing in and out of OCBC's business operations over a specific period. It helps us understand how efficiently they're generating and using their cash. And what's notable here is their strong cash flow generation from operations, which shows they have the ability to fund their own growth, without having to rely too heavily on external financing.
And finally, free cash flow.
Yeah.
Why is this metric so important?
Free cash flow is the cash a company has left over after covering all of its essential operating expenses and capital expenditures. It's essentially the financial fuel they have to pay dividends, reduce debt, or reinvest for future growth.
Okay.
So OCBC's solid free cash flow, it underscores their financial flexibility and their capacity for future growth.
It sounds like OCBC is demonstrating strong financial health across the board.
Yeah, I'd say so.
The way they're managing their income streams, their assets, liabilities, and cash flow, it really positions them well for continued success.
Definitely.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to shift our focus to the topic of shareholder value. How is OCBC planning to reward its shareholders, and what are the specifics? All right, so we've covered how OCBC makes money, how they manage their finances, and some of the trends shaping their business.
Right.
But now let's talk about how they plan to reward those shareholders.
Well, OCBC definitely has a commitment to creating value for their shareholders.
Okay.
One way they do this is through dividends.
Makes sense.
For 2023, they're paying out a total dividend of 72 cents per share.
Okay.
That includes an interim dividend of 38 cents and a final dividend of 34 cents.
That's a pretty substantial payout.
Yeah.
What about share buybacks? Are they using those to return value to shareholders?
Well, their annual report doesn't specifically mention share buyback plans for 2023,
Okay.
but it does emphasize this balanced approach between rewarding shareholders and maintaining a strong capital position.
So making sure they have enough to invest in future growth.
Exactly. It suggests they're really focused on a sustainable dividend policy.
Makes sense. They wouldn't want to overextend themselves. Speaking of future growth, what does the road ahead look like for OCBC?
Well, it's definitely a complex landscape with both opportunities and challenges,
Mm-hmm.
but their commitment to expanding across ASEAN and Greater China is pretty clear,
Okay.
and strategic acquisitions are a key part of that.
Like the one of PT Bank Commonwealth in Indonesia.
Exactly. These acquisitions, they're designed to tap into new markets and expand their customer base.
They seem pretty ambitious. Are there concerns about integrating these new businesses effectively?
Well, integration is always a consideration with any acquisition.
Yeah.
But OCBC has a good track record of successful integrations.
Right.
And their one group philosophy, it probably helps create a more cohesive structure for bringing in these new entities.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Now, what about on the digital front? We talked about their investments in technology. How do those play into their future strategy?
Their embrace of generative AI, with tools like OCBC GPT and OCBC Wingman,
Yeah.
that's a clear sign they're committed to staying ahead of the curve.
So they're not just trying to be efficient internally, they're also thinking about the customer experience.
Exactly. These tools are about enhancing that experience as well.
Okay, so we've talked about the good stuff, but what about those potential storm clouds on the horizon? Global uncertainty, supply chain disruptions, rising interest rates. How prepared are they for those challenges?
Well, they definitely acknowledge these challenges in their annual report, and they emphasize their proactive risk management practices. They've been carefully managing their exposure to things like credit risks, market volatility, liquidity crunches, and operational risks.
So they're being cautious.
Yeah, and their strong capital position, it gives them a cushion to deal with potential problems.
Well, they have a long history of navigating economic cycles.
That's right, 91 years.
That should give investors some confidence in their ability to handle these challenges.
Absolutely. Their track record speaks for itself.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into OCBC's 2023 performance, what's your overall assessment of their future?
Well, they've delivered strong financial results. They've strategically expanded their reach. They've embraced technology, all while staying aware of potential risks.
So they're well positioned for growth.
I'd say so. They seem to be firing on all cylinders.
That's great to hear. Now, before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Consider how OCBC's embrace of technology, especially generative AI, will impact their customer experience.
Interesting.
How will it change the way we bank and interact with financial institutions in the years to come? That's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is.
And of course, we always encourage you to explore OCBC's annual report yourself to get even deeper insights. Until next time, happy exploring.